So welcome, everyone. My name is Dwayne Spencer. I'm the president and CEO of Habitat for Humanity of Greater Memphis. You all know that Habitat helps families build and buy new homes with affordable mortgages. That's what we've been doing in Memphis anyway for almost 40 years. But we also pride ourselves on being innovators and bringing together folks to examine the various social issues around housing to bring about comprehensive and holistic change. So as we started thinking and planning our next Women Build event, which is Women Build is a unique Habitat initiative that's meant to engage women in Habitat's work. And as we started thinking about that again for this year and into 2022, we wanted to do things just a little differently. So we decided first to raise awareness, in particular surrounding issues and hardships that affect women and girls internationally, nationally, and locally, things that impede their ability to thrive, enjoy stability, and build generational wealth through empowerment and homeownership. In May, we looked at issues around sanitation, hygiene, and gender equality, both internationally and right here in our own community. And if you missed that, it's our website. You can go back and take a look, or our team can drop the link in the chat right now, if that's possible. So today, we're joined by friends from Habitat International and Habitat Nepal. And we're going to be talking about our tithe program and how the tithe supports work of Habitat entities around the world. We'll look at the work going on at Habitat Nepal, one of the communities we tithe to, and one of the places I personally travel to. And we'll talk about how we support the work that's taking place there in Nepal. Today, in particular, around women having equitable access to land. And that's just something here in the US we don't even think about. So that's our goal today, to enlighten you about this specific issue. So now I want to introduce my friend, Susan Yao, who leads Habitat's international tithe effort. And I'm not going to steal Susan's thunder, as I know she's going to explain to all of you exactly what tithing means to our mission and why it's so incredibly important to our international work. So Susan, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Dwayne, and thank you everybody for being here today. I'm delighted to be part of this really creative and innovative way to let people know more about the mission. I thought I would give you just a little bit of history and context for today's conversation. A little background about Habitat and our international work. So the idea of Habitat actually started on a community farm in Southwest Georgia. Our founder, Habitat's founder, Millard Fuller, and some other folks came up with the concept of partnership housing down there. The idea of families working together side by side with volunteers to build decent housing. Our founder, Millard Fuller, and his wife, Linda, decided to really test this idea, not in the United States, but in Zaire, which is now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo. So Linda and Millard traveled to Zaire in 1973, and they launched several self-help housing projects in different communities, including one in a community called Ntando. It was a little village with about 3,000 people. The local leaders in the Ntando community had the audacious goal of building a decent home for every community member. So Millard returned to the United States several years later and began talking with other supporters and friends about what are the next steps. And it was from those conversations that the Habitat for Humanity that we all know today was born. The idea was that Habitat for Humanity was going to build houses around the world, Africa and other continents, to support the most needy families. And that the funds for this work would happen in the United States. But during those early days, Millard got a letter from one of his supporters. And the letter said, Millard, what would you think about the possibility of building homes and communities in San Antonio? The housing is awful and there's so much need. Millard agreed to let at this affiliate start in San Antonio on the condition that they share their fundraising and continue using some of those funds to build housing overseas. And that's really the beginning of Habitat's Tithe program. Millard returned to Zaire, and Kim, if you would go back one slide, in 1979 to check on the progress of that village of Nantondo where they were going to build homes for everybody. And at this dedication, they were having a big ceremony, and at the dedication, the leader of the local affiliate, that's the fellow on the left on this photo, took up a collection. And he took half the money, $200, and he gave it to Millard, and he said, use these funds to start a Habitat affiliate somewhere else in the world. And Millard used it to start a Habitat affiliate in Guatemala. So if you, from those early affiliates in Zaire and San Antonio and Guatemala, Habitat's footprint has really grown. It's an amazing story. There are now Habitat affiliates in all 50 states in the United States, including 38 in Tennessee, and in about 70 countries, including in Nepal. And we really continue to be a global organization, to be one Habitat with a shared mission of a world where everybody has a decent place to live. And part of that shared mission is, as Dwayne is going to explain, sharing of the blessings and the abundance that Habitat Memphis has, and sharing it with neighbors around the world. So if I can pass the mic back to Dwayne, who's going to talk a little bit about Habitat Memphis's international work. Thanks, Dwayne.
Thank you, Susan. So as Susan, I want to thank you for helping me and Memphis Habitat truly learn the importance of the tithe. This is my 20th year with the affiliate. And in the early days, I don't think we really took it very seriously. We're just struggling to survive ourselves. But something really changed for us around 2016, around the time that we hosted the Jimmy and Rosalynn Carter Work Project. At the same time, Susan was being very generous and offering to take me on some trips abroad to see the work that was taking place at other country affiliates like Costa Rica, Cote d'Ivoire, and Nepal. And so those trips were really eye-opening. And we were very blessed after hosting the Jimmy and Rosalynn Carter Work Project. We had a very successful fundraising campaign. And we really thought that, we're blessed. We want to pass it on and be a blessing to others. And we really stepped up and became what I would call a major contributor to the tithe, where we contribute $100,000 annually to the tithe. And we divide these contributions out to areas that we think really need the money the most. And so it's been really exciting for our team to sit back and think about which country or which program we'd like to support. In fact, our team got really excited about the tithe, and we actually have done a couple of global village trips, one to Guatemala and then one also to Nicaragua. And both of those trips were also very eye-opening and very compelling. So my time in Nepal was really special. Unfortunately, I wasn't feeling very well or sleeping well much of that trip, but it was still really one for the books. I met some of the most amazing and beautiful souls there. I heard stories of staggering challenges as well as ones of hope and aspiration. Prior to our trip, through some of the materials that were shared from Christy and others, I learned that we were traveling to the region of the world with the greatest housing need. more than 1 billion, that's with a B, more than 1 billion people lack adequate shelter, and most of them have no access to proper water and sanitation. That just exacerbates the issue. So that really set the tone for my expectations and really fueled my desire to see it for myself. So thank you again, Susan, for taking me along. I learned about all of the natural disasters that take place in Nepal, on top of the staggering poverty. On our trip, we learned about reconstruction efforts for earthquake-affected families, the disaster resident housing for flood-affected families. We also learned about the extensive use of bamboo in house construction. I had not seen that. Maybe I saw it in Hong Kong, and I thought, wow, that it must be really strong and resilient. And I saw that they were using it there in Nepal, so it was fascinating. And then we learned about the microfinance loans that were mostly being used by women to create their own small micro enterprises, from raising livestock to all sorts of agricultural activities. So it was amazing. It was eye-opening, and we're still very much committed to Nepal. And Susan, so I want to thank you for the invitation to go on that trip. And Christy, thank you for the hospitality while I was there. So the rest of today's discussion is going to be moderated by our own Chris Reeder Young. So Chris is an applied anthropologist, and she has worked for Memphis Habitat for 11 years. And right now she's serving as our senior research and evaluation manager. And so Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dwayne. I am so thrilled to be moderating today's Women's Build webinar titled Women and Land Access. You know, in other webinars that we've done, we've discussed global issues around access to clean water, affordable housing. And today we get to focus a little bit more specifically. And we're going to be talking about gender discrimination and accessing land ownership. Some of the reasons why these disparities exist in the first place, and then how Habitat is working in Nepal to create these sustainable solutions that improve well-being for women, their families, and their communities, and see some of the stuff that Dwayne just shared. In US and Canada, we think in terms of homelessness, right? But today we're going to be talking about something a little bit more specific, and that's landlessness. Access to land and the economic stability that comes from legal and social land ownership is one of the greatest predictors of poverty, malnutrition, underage marriages, and in general poor health for women. In 34 countries, daughters do not have equal land inheritance rights as sons, and in 35 countries, widows lack the ability to inherit their husband's property or assets. It usually goes to the sons or the males in the family. Right now, women are responsible for well over 50% of the world's agricultural labor, but between 5 and 20% actually have legal access to that land. In general, when women do own land, they own far less than men. And it's not just about purchasing and owning the land, right? It's about what you get to grow on it, what you get to produce on it, what you raise on it. Who you get to say it goes to after you pass away, how you transfer it or share it with other people. When we add civil unrest and climate change, bonded labor, deforestation, natural disasters, as Dwayne shared, political conflicts and patriarchal traditions, and of course now COVID, we can see why reforming land laws is so important, especially for outcomes for women. So I'm excited to share that to help us better understand this topic, we have Christy Stickney, who's the National Director of Habitat International in Nepal. She's worked in international development for the last 30 years, designing and leading truly scalable, pro-poor, pro-woman focused programming. And then during the 90s, she guided a microfinance product design with the Opportunity International. And that allowed a network-wide shift to really do outreach to primarily women and individuals experiencing economic instability. She pioneered some really cool programs of Habitat for Humanity that gave shape to the global housing finance and market development strategies. And that created access to improved housing for millions of lower income families. And she's contributed to some really cool research and publications that I have just recently discovered and really enjoyed. So Christy, I would like to welcome you to the webinar and to go ahead and start sharing your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. I'll also share some images with you so you can get a fuller picture of what life's like in Nepal. Just to clarify, I'm currently in the US. We came to get vaccinated and to visit with family this summer, and then I'm heading back to Nepal in a couple weeks. So taking advantage of being on the same time zone with many of you. So what I'm going to share is a bit more of a journey. I'm not particularly a land expert per se. I'm more of a habitat person. But this has been a really interesting journey for me personally, and also for Habitat Nepal, as we've come to realize the importance of women's land rights in Nepal. So for any of you who've been to Nepal or know of Nepal, it's a country of incredibly diverse ethnicities, religions, cultures, and even castes. So Kim, we can go to the next photo. The next slide shares images. These are 3 different encounters or celebrations where we had housing handovers and housing dedications. And Habitat, this is the most celebrated moment, is when we hand over houses to the actual families and they can move in and take ownership of their new homes. So these were 3 different ceremonies, and as you can see, they're all in Nepal, and these women are all wearing their ethnic clothing. One group is the Maithili family, the Maithili caste. There's also Santals on the bottom. That's a very small ethnic group that is living on the border with India. Some of them live in India, some in Nepal. And then on the top, we have the Chowdhuries with their own ethnic attire. And that was a new community we dedicated earlier this year. So within these traditions, people tend to not mingle. They tend to not marry outside their traditional cultural group, but they rather retain many of the practices, the beliefs, the celebrations, the festivals of their specific ethnic groups. So within these different groups, the tendency is that male children, they marry and then they bring their family into the home with their parents, and they live with them. They provide for their parents as they age, and then they receive the full inheritance from their parents. Meanwhile, women marry and they join their husband's family. They leave their own family and then move physically to the husband's household and live with their in-laws. And this is carried out throughout the country. It's also common in other countries adjoining Nepal, such as India. In this way, land, along with other family assets, tend to pass down through the male family lineage. And women traditionally have not been heirs or property owners. Our last census in Nepal in 2011 revealed that less than 20% of women own land. And those who do own land tend to be in urban areas, not rural areas. This has a huge impact on women's security and stability, as well as on their social and economic status. So I want to share a bit what we observed in Habitat. As I've been in Habitat Nepal for 3.5 years, and something I noticed over time in visiting our communities where Habitat has worked, is that many of our homes, the homes we've helped build, are inhabited by women-headed households, single women without husbands. And In these cases, they may have lost their husband due to death. They may be widows, but many of them are also separated or divorced, or they fled a situation of domestic violence, and they're often living alone with their children. So I asked myself, where were these women living before? Why are they now homeless? Since in theory, they had gone to live with the men in their homes, but now they were landless and homeless. And what has caused them, therefore, to be landless and homeless and have nowhere to live, such that Habitat has had to respond to their need? So the situation within the country is such that often when these conflicts occur, when there is strife within the family or there is separation, the women are often pushed out with their children and they're left without land. And this is something we learned over time. As we continue to ask this question, it emerged that women are unprotected. If they do not own land, then when these situations occur of widowhood or separation or divorce, they have no recourse, they have no resource. And often they're left then without any place to live. One of our fellow Habitat partners, Jamie Majewski, who's the director of Habitat East Jefferson County in Washington State, she visited us several years ago and asked a very pointed question: what can we do about this? And so as we were observing this situation occurring over and over of women becoming disenfranchised and having no place to live with their families, we realized we need to stop this chain, this sequence of events that keeps occurring by ensuring that women own land. And in our Habitat programs, we need to take that step. It's a challenge because culturally it is going against how the culture currently operates. And I have reflected and wondered, how far do we take our respect for cultural norms? Do we need to respect that the inheritance does pass down through the male lineage, or is this something we should really challenge as an organization? So in consultation with my team, we've taken the decision to align ourselves with the intention of Nepal's government, which seeks to promote women's land ownership. Now, this is a stated intention. It's not necessarily carried out, as we can see through the statistics. But one of the things the government has done and has implemented so far successfully is a tax incentive. It favors registering land in women's names. And so in urban areas, this has become much more of a practice of at least ensuring that women's names are also on the title so that people can receive this tax incentive. However, most rural families do not even have a title, a formal title, as land tends to be held in rural areas in what's called a customary ownership. So it's a type of traditional informal ownership that is still recognized, and it allows the land property to be owned, yet it is not as formal and it does not lead to taxation. So it's led us to several different actions as an organization. One of those is specifically at the project level. We ensure that women's names are on the land title whenever we are granting land as an organization. So I'd like to give an example from what's known as our Halia project. Halia are bonded laborers. These are people that lived in a type of financial slavery to landowners, wealthy landowners. And through their labor on these agricultural lands, they paid off a debt. Yet they're never able to fully pay off the debt with their labor. And so they remain in this situation of financial bondage, often for generations. So these are people that have never owned land. They live on the properties where they are working, but they live as guests and basically as servants. So the government freed the Halia and they promised them land and housing, and yet they had no way to implement that promise. Habitat was invited then to step in and actually make good on those promises. And with specific tithes from US affiliates, we launched the Halia project 2 years ago. And this is a wonderful image to me because it's a picture of families holding for the first time in their lives land titles. This is the first time in generations that they have owned property. And we've built over 100 homes with Halia families, and we're now working with other types of bonded laborers as well. In this situation, we ensure that every family has a land title that's in the name of both the man, the wife, and the husband, or the male and female heads of that household. Another way we're seeking to address this issue of women's land rights is at the systemic level. So we work with the Department of Land Management. This is the same department that granted the funds for the Halia families. They have a legal mandate to encourage women to own land. But we've worked with them specifically in developing procedural or operational guidelines that ensure that joint ownership is promoted and provided anytime the government grants land. So this is now a common standard throughout the country. Whenever a government grants land, they are required to provide a joint land title. Thirdly, we're working at a community level, and this is our newest effort, which is building awareness among the communities themselves of the importance of, for one, formalizing their land ownership. That's the first step, is requiring the importance of getting their land registered and formalizing their ownership, as it provides greater tenure security, but also will allow them in the future to build and to transact that land. And we secondly help to ensure that women's names are on the title. And often, again, there are cultural barriers to this. And so the challenge is to address this in a way that increases awareness of women and men of the importance of women owning land. We're working jointly now with a group called Landessa that has had a lot of experience in this in India, and helping them and working with them to develop a strategy for increasing, we call it land literacy, but it's an awareness of how to register land, and especially in the name of women. So this is the start to this kind of work. It's really been more of a journey and a process of realizing the incredible need that exists within Nepal to strengthen women's land rights. But it's also been a journey to see ways we can effectively do this. And through support of the US affiliate Tithe, we've been able to test these different opportunities and to turn them into real, incredibly impactful stories such as these. I think the last slide has a few images of these. This was a community I visited just earlier this year. We had a window when we could travel before the second COVID wave hit Nepal. But we definitely need to do further work in researching how to have greater impact in this area of women's land rights. This community here was a large group of very low caste Dalit families that had squatted along canals that were dry at the time. There was no water at all. But as you can see, they're now flooded. This is monsoon season. And so once the rainwaters come in, it completely floods that area. And the exciting thing is we've been able to work with the municipality of that area to secure a large enough plot of land within walking distance of this community where they'll be relocated, and they will be acquiring this land over time along with a safe, secure home. So that's one of our really exciting projects. Over 100 families will be located to this new land site, and they'll own land for the first time in their lives as well. So I'll hand it back to you, Chris.
Hey, thank you so much, Christy. I always appreciate the images as you're telling these stories to help the folks who are joining us really connect and see kind of housing conditions and put a humanitarian face to the work that we're doing. Housing is such a critical aspect of outcomes for individuals. I have a couple of questions for you. For those of you tuning in, please feel free to drop some questions and thoughts into the chat box. Myself and Habitat will be picking those up to make sure that we get those questions to Christy. So Christy, when women are given secure land rights, researchers and activists usually see additional improvements for her and her family. And you shared a little bit about that in your presentation. We see the same thing with affordable mortgages and when those are provided to women. Can you talk more about how land rights impact women and then their families and then their communities, and maybe speaking in terms of how economic autonomy impacts childhood outcomes or even, you know, civic engagement in the community?
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful to see the effect that women's land rights and even just tenure security has on women. But when they know that they own a property, the strength and stability that that gives to them and to their family is incredibly powerful. And many studies do point to the economic empowerment that provides, as women are known for investing in their families. So while I was working in microfinance previous to Habitat, most of those programs were also focused on women, because when women, their incomes increase, the children and the rest of the family automatically benefit, because that's where women put their money, in children's education, nutrition, health, and such. Similarly with home benefits, as women not only own land, but become engaged in house improvements and in making modifications to the home, building a better kitchen, adding toilets. These kinds of things directly impact health, well-being of the entire family. And something wonderful I saw in this community that we dedicated earlier in the year, it was the children who were rejoicing in having open streets where they could play. They had space to play that was safe, that was healthy. It wasn't infested with insects or rats. There weren't snakes all around as they had been previously in their homes. They literally had snakes coming in. So these added benefits, as we all know, they not just health benefits. These are a sense of well-being, a sense of safety, and a sense of joy that comes from that. And beyond that, the sense of self-esteem that women have when they own property, it allows them and empowers them to take much greater participation in community endeavors, in household decisions. It gives them just a better place in household dynamics, in decision-making. And we've seen it even allows them to stand up to situations of domestic violence. So that the effects really ripple out in so many different ways. And again, not just to the women themselves, but also to the children and eventually the whole community.
Absolutely, and that's so beautiful that you described it as a ripple effect, beginning with the empowerment and connection and legal access to land by the mothers or the wives or the women.
I just wanted to add to that. Another thing we've seen is the birth of more income generating opportunities. This one community, there were probably 6 cottage industries or home-based businesses that had popped up just since they moved into the community. Again, because they had the space, they had the rainwater wasn't coming in and damaging their inventory. They had a property that they could use and adapt to their business needs as well. So all these things come, springing up as additional benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the Memphis affiliate, a lot of the primary and secondary and sort of tertiary community impacts that we see is that it's a lot about just individual wealth creation through stable home ownership, but that changes the trajectories for future generations. And the role of civic engagement is so powerful that empowering one individual kind of helps an individual find their place in a civic and broader sense. And I would imagine that may be useful as we are working on securing land ownership laws in India, and having that community grassroots driven voice at the table. Because speaking to members of political leadership can kind of be overwhelming. We have an individual, a homeowner, who has done the same thing. She started with a food truck, producing really incredible foods out of her home, and has now opened up, a shop, which we enjoy at lunchtime many times. So, the next question is a little bit heavy, but I did want to ask it because the United States and everywhere else watched in absolute terror and horror as India was slammed by COVID. And we hope that in the future there are humanitarian efforts that are focused on addressing access to vaccines and medical assistance. But we all know at the center of pretty much all health issues, is equal and affordable housing, whatever that may look like per the country. Could you share with me some of the ways that equitable land access for women in particular may be a positive contributor to maybe surviving COVID, either individually or as a family, as a community, as a country, and how you may have seen some things that kind of cross that intersection?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's making me reflect a bit on our current situation, because we are by far from over this COVID crisis in Nepal. We're just recovering from a second wave, and yet it seems like a third wave may already be brewing. So as the U.S. Agency for International Development has found through its own research and others, land ownership, secure land ownership is one of the foundations of resilience for a community. So it contributes not just in terms of economic security, but also the household's well-being in knowing we will not be displaced during this time of disaster and of emergency. So land tenure security in general is really foundational. The way we've seen it, I would say, in Nepal, at this time, one of the interesting effects that we've observed is the migration, the return of overseas workers. So Nepal, like many low-income countries, has millions of people living overseas in India, in the Middle East, and other countries. And these have come flooding back into Nepal with the onset of COVID. And by having a home and a place where these people can return to and ultimately invest in, this has really built up the strength of these communities. We were able to capitalize actually on all this added labor during the time of the pandemic. They were home, they were able bodies, and we just ramped up house construction during that time. So that was kind of a special benefit in that time. But it's also a time we know of added stress within the family. And so again, it speaks to the importance of women having a real say in the household dynamic and feeling secure of that, and being able to be at the table and negotiating and ensuring that their rights are upheld as well. in times of, as we all know, there are increased incidences of domestic violence during this time, and other kinds of tension within families and communities where economic hardship has become just such a reality. And as we look to the future, really housing and land ownership are more needed than ever to ensure family safety and well-being, and yet it's more unattainable than ever as people's incomes have been negatively impacted, and their health as well. And the price of construction, the materials, has skyrocketed. I know in the States this is a reality as well. So it just speaks to the dire importance of the work we're doing in land rights as well as in housing rights, and ensuring that women have full participation in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, is so parallel to the experiences that many habitators in US, Canada experienced as well. So thank you for sharing on that. I think the intersection was pretty important to talk about. And as we kind of approach the future and some more uncertainty, it would be interesting to see just how further that intersection looks for folks, I think. And, we have a lot of Habitat folks who may be new to how things happen in Paul and how the programs are implemented. And I was asking, myself, like the logistical questions, like how do we start? And I was wondering if you could sort of highlight how very poor families actually obtain land through Habitat's project.
Right, so there's a variety of means of doing that, since land is a fundamental piece of all of this. I mentioned the Halia project, so that was unique. The government had earmarked funds, and then those funds were used to purchase land locally. And so Habitat works with local partners, the municipality, to broker those land purchases. That's a very unique scenario. If there aren't government funds available, what often happens is government may grant, and we've had this happen, they may grant existing municipal lands to a community that needs to be relocated. So that would be a government granting. In a recent case, we had a private landowner grant land to families from his own resources, out of his own, social conscience. He had actually, many of them had been working on his farmland for generations, and he saw it as a way to give back to the community. So he granted land to them, and that's pretty unique. There's another community we're just starting working in, where a microfinance institution purchased the land and is now financing the loans for the families to acquire the land through their own purchase and borrowing. So it's a wide range. And in many cases, where people also build on their own land. And so then governments, the local governments, will help to formalize the land ownership in that case. It's a way of acknowledging you've lived on there long enough, you pretty much own it, we will grant it to you, which is to the benefit of the municipality, because then they can actually tax them and earn some income. So there's a real win-win in that. But there is also quite a bit of administrative procedure in which we need to help them, and to ensure that women's names are also on the title in that whole process.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Wide range. Lots of different. We'll probably try some new ones this coming year. But it takes a lot of innovation. Yeah.
It really does. And, I think that's sort of the nature of Habitat, is that we continue to evolve with the changing housing tides. As climate changes, as, pandemics such as COVID hit, we have to kind of navigate new territory. But I think that transition kind of sets us up for a new question that we just got, and that is, what's the role of advocating for policy in this work? Or if policy is not something that everyone immediately touches, but what's the role of having conversation with leadership, political leadership, maybe elders in individual cultural traditions? What's that role of kind of going to the top with this kind of bottom up perspective?
It's a great question. I think that's an area where we still have to develop in our work. And I'll be honest, this has come kind of organically, as you've heard from this story that I've given or tried to give. We really do need to work more in that area, and we've applied for funding and grants, and so far we just haven't been able to secure funding to do that kind of policy work. As I've said before, we did start at the top. There is a constitutional mandate to make land and housing accessible to all. Then the implementation of that requires a whole series of policies and laws. And then on the implementation side, connecting with that, building awareness, building capacity at the local government level. So it really is a large undertaking. And obviously Habitat can't do this alone. We need to connect with other local community groups and legal groups that are working on these areas. But we so far we don't even have a specific person dedicated just to land. So it's an area where we're taking baby steps, but we really do need to develop that out further. So thanks for raising that concern.
Sure, and so much of that can apply to the work that we do domestically at Habitat on the Hill. The data that I provide my communications team and my leadership on how to have, again, grassroots-driven conversation. Because as we work to change policy that has patriarchal influences, having that's a full-time frontline job, and you're moving mountains in a very beautiful way. So I greatly appreciated that answer. So I have one last question for you, and then I'm going to pass it back to Dwayne to close this out. But, you know, I heard you and Susan talk about Jamie and someone here saying, how can we help? How can we contribute? And there's so many different ways along the continuum of engagement that a person can join, whether it's letter writing, educating oneself. You provided me with some incredible literature through Landessa that I felt has shown so much light on today's topic for me. And I wanted to know if you have, you know, the stage to share, you know, your grown-up Christmas wish is what ways can Habitat leaders in the United States, even volunteers or other staff members or just people new to this topic, how can they stay tuned? How can they stay active in ways that specifically contribute to improving outcomes on the topics that you've shared today?
Well, I mean, Jamie was a case of someone who visited us and saw and spoke honestly about her impressions and her questions. And I really value that. As Dwayne was a part of our legacy build trip, all of the US affiliate leaders who came on that trip and a subsequent trip we held about a year and a half ago, those are true partners of ours. Those are the organizations we feel are brothers and sisters working alongside us and have been such a great encouragement even during this last really rough year and a half. So that kind of partnership is so valuable, and it's something I love about Habitat and this whole tithe program. That being said, obviously visiting Nepal is really not a possibility for most people right now. Once we start that up again, we do have the Global Village program that many affiliates come and visit us and come and build and work alongside our families and communities. And that's something wonderful that we can offer through Habitat, and it's a way to engage. And as I mentioned before, Chris, I mean, like many Habitat organizations, we have the desire to do this. We have a vision for how we want to go about it, and we just haven't been able to secure the funding yet. So obviously that whole area is a huge one. And if anyone knows of someone or a foundation or a person who's especially interested in these matters, we would love to approach them with these ideas. So those are the ones that come to mind right now. And if anyone wants to do research for us on our behalf, we'll take volunteer researchers too.
Well, I think I can volunteer Dwayne to always be a travel conduit, and I can probably volunteer myself to be a volunteer researcher anytime. But Christy, thank you. Christy and Susan, you just joined. Did you want to share a couple of things?
Well, I just wanted to give one thought about your last question to Christy, is how can people be involved in what's going on in Habitat Nepal and other places, and that is to get involved with your local affiliate. Habitat Memphis is a great conduit to the work that's going on all over the world, and if you're interested in that and have a particular interest in international work and international housing development, international women's issues, I can think of no better place to start than with your local affiliate there in Memphis.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Christy and Susan. Being able to access land improves health, food access, wealth creation, not just for current families, but future generations to come. And in the United States, we know that access to affordable homeownership also improves the same conditions for families. Humans, especially women who have been discriminated against, deserve the right to safe, accessible financial products and titles to the land on which they are living, thriving, and sustaining future female generations. Thank you again. Dwayne, I'm going to pass it back to you.
All right. Thank you, Chris. And of course, thank you, Susan and Christy, for joining us today. Thank you for your insights, your passion to bring this information to a broader audience and to give voice to so many voiceless women and girls around the world, in particular in Nepal. Christy, when you were talking, sort of the way I feel when I'm on these journeys with Susan and seeing it in person, I just literally clapped. I wanted to cheer when I saw the picture of the families holding the title to their land. I was here clapping like, yes. And at the same time, it's overwhelming to hear the term financial slavery, financial bondage. We're so blessed, really, to simply be born in a westernized nation in the United States, and to have all the benefits and blessings that really come with that. We really are. Just a reminder, Habitat works in about 70 countries around the world. And the stories of these struggling families is almost always the same. There are poverty conditions, very low incomes, very minimal resources. And yet at the end of the day, they all want the same things that you and I want: to be able to live in a decent, secure, safe house, a place to call home. Yet there are millions, literally, still unserved families out there. And so, we want to eventually have a women build here in Memphis. We want to raise money. We want to serve additional families in our local area. But we don't want to forget about the women and girls around the world who also need our help. And so again, this event is to inform all of you, to educate, to enlighten so many of us who really live lives of privilege. We really do. We're just so lucky. And the world is big, and it's easy for the needs, the hopes, and the dreams of women and girls in Nepal to seem so far away. Logistically, it is. And from afar, the world spins exactly the same for all of us. But up close, our opportunities are just not equitable. It's just not the same. And I just hope that those of you who are watching have heard something that is inspiring you to act, to do something, to get involved. And as Susan said, it can be internationally, And it can be right here in Memphis with us as we continue to put the plans and the foundation together for this Women Build event that we hope to do in 2022. We need committee members and people who are interested in fundraising and inviting other people, other women to be involved in this effort. So thank you again. And before we close out, I just want to make sure that you guys know to go to our website and sign up for emails if you haven't already done that, so that we can be in communication with you about other things that are coming up. In particular, Thursday, August 26th is Women's Equality Day. And our team is thinking about what we can do to honor that day and focus on women's issues right here in our own community. And for local folks, we canceled our homeowner celebration this past weekend thinking it was going to rain. I don't think we got that much rain, but we will be rescheduling that soon. You'll hear about it. And we are hopeful that we'll be engaging volunteers on the build site this fall. We're just going to keep watching what's happening with COVID, and we will be in touch regarding that. We are hoping, that we will have people out on the build site in person. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed. Again, continue to pray for our organization. Continue to support the work that we're doing. We can't do it without the public and without friends like you. When you support and help us, we then support and help our friends and neighbors around the world, like Christy and her team and her efforts in Nepal. So thank you for spending a part of your day with us, and we hope you have a great weekend. So take care. Bye, everybody.